Today we're going to figure out the absolute best way to caulk your moldings. We're going to have a look at the two most popular methods here. We'll have a look at the angle tip with more of a pulling type stroke versus the straight cut tip with more of a pushing method. If you've seen my videos in the past, you will know that I am a huge fan of the angle tip with a couple of modifications that we'll get into. Today, we're going to put these two methods to the test and figure out which is best. I've got 3 different situations to test out the two methods, and I'm not going to lie, the results are a bit of a roller coaster. So the first scenario here is just your straight baseboard run, no corners, no big gaps. Anytime you see the square, that is going to be the straight cut tip. For this tip here, I've just cut it as small as I could get it and still being able to squeeze out caulking without it coming out the back. I'm a fan of putting on the least amount of material. When it comes to molding and caulking, you want to put on just enough to cover the gap. Now, the DAP material does not require you to puncture the seal. And if you do need to puncture the seal on your caulking, and this is not going to fit in there if you cut such a small hole, just grab yourself a little wire, harpoon that in there about 15-20 times, and you'll be good to go on that. For the slanted or the angled tip, that's just going to have the little slant on here. For the angle tip, I just cut that usually about 30-45 degrees. It doesn't matter. Again, I've cut it super small so that there's a very small hole on the end. If you're getting it squeezing out the back, just cut the hole slightly bigger. And then I like to take that tip and then run it in a couple of sanding blocks just to get a couple of little ridges on the side. That's going to help your tube to just ride along the way it should. Then I just throw a little orientation line on there just to help you keep that tube perfectly orientated the whole time. Initial thoughts here, the first coat with the straight cut tip is actually pretty incredible. I threw that on there, it put on a perfect bead, and I think you could get away without even smoothing that over with your finger. It was very, very impressive. With the angle tip, the first pass was also really nice. Now, when it came to just smoothing both the beads out with your finger, you can see the slanted tip has put on a little less material, and consequently, it didn't quite make as much of a mess, kind of smearing up the wall. All in all, I was very impressed with the straight cut tip. It did an amazing job, just initial pass with no smoothing over. The second situation here is giant gaps. A lot of times everything is not going to be perfect in the real world and you're going to have big gaps. I've created 2 baseboard situations here with kind of like 3/16, 1/8 inch gaps, big nasty gaps. How will the tips handle them? Before we get to that, just a shameless little self-promotion plug here. If you want to store some open tubes, these little red condoms here are pretty amazing. They just work like a condom. If you're familiar with those, they just slip on there and seal out the air. Excellent storage solution. I'll put links for these in the description, as well as the dripless guns here that I recommend. With this big gap and the square cut tip, it worked incredible. You just kind of hold it to a 90 degree on the angle there, and just you can push it, you can pull it, doesn't really matter. It did a good job of filling up the gap. I smoothed it over with my finger. It turned out pretty decent. With something like a big gap like this, you might have to do a few coats, because you can see as I've smoothed it over, it's kind of sagged down. Usually something like this will take a couple coats, but the square tip did a really great job. With the angled tip here, now this gets to the heart. A lot of people had mentioned in some of my other videos, with such a small hole in there, that's fine for perfect situations. But what if you have these big gaps, which happen in real life? The angle tip did just fine. You can turn it sideways and just kind of fill it up. And yeah, it takes 2 or 3 passes. It did a good job. I smoothed that over. And yeah, it looks very comparable to the straight cut tip. The thing that I really do like about the straight cut tip is very simple. You don't have to worry about any kind of orientation or spinning the tube. It's just always ready to go. So far, very impressed with the square cut. The last situation here, where the rubber meets the road and there's just tire screeching everywhere, inside corners with baseboards. When it came to the angled tip, this thing was incredible. The bonus of the angled tip is that you can get in there and you can stab right in the corner and pull out, stab in the other way, pull out, Minimal amount of material. It laid the material down nice and thin all the way along. Put your finger in there, smooth it out, boom, you move on with your day. You're caulking miles and miles. It did a great job. When it came to the flat cut tip, this is where things got pretty interesting. The thing about the flat tip is you can't really get it into the corner and still maintain that nice kind of pushing method. You have to angle it a bit, and then it's not going to lay the material down the way that you would want. And it just puts on too much material. When I smoothed it over with my finger, it was a giant fail. It took me minutes and minutes to just kind of wipe everything off here and get it looking decent. You don't want to do that when you are caulking moldings. For that reason alone, the angle tip is the clear winner. It's a bit more difficult to use, and there is some nuances that will make a big difference. If you want to see how to use this angle tip, check out this video right over here. For this tip here, I've just cut it straight, oh my God. I'm just rambling. I'm rambling, man.